Welcome to Let's Talk Surrogacy, a podcast where we explore all things surrogacy, the journeys, the insights, and the remarkable people along the way. Today, we're discussing one of the hottest topics in surrogacy, embryos. Wade, the Director of Community Resources and Surrogacy Expert, is here to join us in a little Q&A. Let's dive in.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Hi, Wade.
Thanks for the introduction. That's great.
How do you think people emotionally process that decision to stop trying to carry?
You know, everybody's different, and it really is the intended parents on where they're at in the process, what their goals are in the future, and they really have to, go through that grief and loss, things like that, where they're not able to carry themselves. And so, our staff, we have licensed social workers, we have counselors. We're really here for those families if they want to talk about things, process stuff. We're here for them. So that's part of what we do.
I can imagine that is super important and a very valuable resource for those intended parents once they do reach that point to, like you said, process that grief and loss. And then on the other side, it's kind of exciting because once they do finally match and have this baby, it's a celebration.
It's all worth it.
Yeah, it's like full circle.
It is a journey, and that's why they call it that.
How many IVF cycles is enough, you think, before someone considers surrogacy?
That's a tough question. And again, I'm going to have to revert to the fertility doctor on their medical advice on how many they feel is appropriate.
Yeah, because not only cost, but the emotional stress and strain that it takes on a woman's body and
time.
And as a couple. Yeah,
the delays. Yep.
Yeah. What does the transition between the IVF patient to the intended parent through surrogacy look like?
Usually families have exhausted everything at the clinic through the IVF, trying to get themselves pregnant. When that fails, then they really move towards surrogacy. So I would say it's really a question or a topic you want to talk to your doctor about to make sure that you're following their medical advice.
What are the first steps to making that decision?
The first steps to making a decision is obviously as a couple or if you're single, you want to build a family and you're unable to do it biologically. And so that's really that first step is to exhaust other avenues before you really move towards surrogacy. So it's a tough question.
Do you need embryos ready before you match up?
We let families do a couple different things. So first off, we do not actually match a family until their embryos are created, because if we do that while the families are creating the embryos, we really have a surrogate sitting on the sideline waiting. And by the time you get into a match, these surrogates are very excited and anxious to kind of keep that momentum going. So we want to wait until embryos are created before we match.
Now, what if you join the agency and you're unsuccessful with creating embryos? What are your options?
So lots of different options at this stage. You can try to create more embryos. You could, if you needed an egg or a sperm donor, you can go that avenue. Or you can also do embryo donation, which is adopting embryos. So there's several different ways families can achieve a baby just based on if they can or cannot create embryos.
How many embryos would someone need for surrogacy?
That is the $1 million question, Lindsay. It's different for everybody, but I really would suggest the intended parents really have a heart-to-heart with their fertility doctor. Sometimes it's not how many they want, it's how many they can get. And so it's really something that we really want to focus in and have them talk to their doctor about all of that.
Can the intended parents work with you with only one embryo?
Great question. There are a lot of agencies out there that will not take on families with just one embryo and then they're done. Because it takes so much time, energy, money to get a surrogate screened and ready for that embryo transfer. If that embryo does not take, the surrogate's disappointed, she's frustrated, and we have a large chance of losing her. So the family loses, the surrogate loses, and American Surrogacy loses. However, we are a very unique agency, and we do take on these families. We try only to take on a few at a time, but yes, we do work with families with one embryo.
What if you have 2 embryos? Should you create more?
It's a great question to ask your fertility doctor. You want to find out what their success rates are on the first or second embryo transfers. Some families may wait to go through those 2 first to see if they're successful, and if not, they move toward creating more. And other families that we have worked with go through those 2 embryos while they're creating more embryos because maybe they want a larger family or have more children.
Yeah, and it would seem like that would be kind of a smart choice because you're really saving time.
Yeah, you are saving time. However, it's very rigorous screening and medications to do an egg retrieval. So some families pause that a little bit to see if they can be successful with those first 2.
Yeah, that makes sense too. I see how you could really do it a number of ways. If you run out of embryos and you want to create more, what happens in that time period for the surrogate?
Let's just say they're in a match and everything's moving forward. They had 2 embryos, they're unsuccessful. Now they want to create more embryos. Well, there's just no guarantees that that surrogate will wait around for you to, create more. Now, sometimes they would. Maybe you had such a good relationship with that surrogate and she really wants to help you. And so if it takes 2 or 3 extra months to do that process, some of them would wait around. But there's just no guarantees. And that's why if I have a family like that that has only a couple embryos and then plan to create more down the road, I really suggest the limited risk program because it has unlimited matching just in case that surrogate wants to move on to another family. It doesn't cost anything to get into that new match.
Do you need to have genetically tested embryos to work with American Surrogacy?
You don't have to have them genetically tested, but it is a very, very good idea to have them genetically tested. Most fertility clinics in the United States do this testing nowadays. There are some old school doctors that don't, but surrogates know this. They're in these Facebook social groups, they talk to each other, and they know that they would rather get matched with a family that has genetically tested embryos versus not. So it is always a good idea to talk to your doctor and make sure that testing is done.
Does fresh versus frozen embryos make a difference?
I've heard there's pros and cons to both. Again, I really want that family to talk to that fertility doctor about that, frozen eggs versus fresh eggs. So, again, you want to talk to your doctor about the pros and cons and take their medical advice.
Defer to those experts.
That's right. Defer to the experts.
Can you ship the embryos to where a surrogate lives?
I always suggest to families not to do that. Let's just say you come from San Francisco, California. Your clinic is there in San Francisco. Let's say you get matched up with a surrogate in Denver, Colorado. Well, in order to now ship those embryos to Denver, you have to find a clinic, you have to be an established patient with that clinic, and that type of process could take a while. Some clinics are very, very busy where they really cannot meet with you for 1 or 2 or 3 months, and that's just delaying the process, and it's taking time away from when your baby is born. So I always tell families, keep their embryos right where they're at, and we will get the surrogate to them. And it really just keeps that momentum going on their journey, and they have their baby a lot faster that way.
Oh, I love that. What if the embryos are in another country?
It's a little bit more complex here. So you, have to first find a clinic in the United States that is accepting out-of-country embryos because there is specific testing that needs to be done when the embryos enter the United States. So that is step one. Then you have to find a shipping company to do that as well. And usually the fertility clinics will have some shipping companies that they utilize, but some of them are only domestic versus international. So it's a challenge for a family to get those embryos to the United States. And I always suggest to families too, maybe looking at just creating more embryos in the United States. So therefore you don't have to do that shipping from one country to the next.
So that was interesting. You said that there's different testing for some embryos that are in other countries. What is that?
It's a really good question for the fertility doctor.
Gotcha.
you want to find a specific clinic that is willing to do that, and not very many are. And then really just talk to your clinic about what's that testing like. And that's why a lot of these clinics don't do this, because they probably don't have the technology to do that type of testing. But again, you want to talk to your fertility clinic.
Would you be able to choose the gender of your embryo?
Again, those are medical questions, and, we're not doctors and we're not attorneys. So I suggest, when you do a Q&A, when you set up that consultation with your clinic, that should be a good question to put on your list of questions on if they can choose the gender.
Can you do a double embryo transfer?
Double embryo transfer to our agency means that you're really going for twins, and also to the surrogate. There's a couple challenges with this. The first one is you have to find a fertility clinic willing to do a double embryo transfer, because a lot of them nowadays won't, because it's really dangerous for a surrogate to carry twins more so than just a single baby. So that's your first challenge, is to make sure your clinic is willing to do that. The second challenge is again, surrogates talk to each other, and they know it's more dangerous for them to carry twins as well. So it could be a little bit longer to match you with a surrogate willing to take on a double embryo transfer. Also, she gets compensated more if she gets twins. And so it's a little bit more expensive for that family going that route.
If you have several embryos and you want to do a dual journey, do you guys allow that?
Yes, we do. What we try to do first is we want to do that first journey and get that surrogate to at least 20 weeks gestation, which means she's 5 months along. Once she achieves that goal, then we can start the family on a second journey. We believe in a proper birth order of the children, and that's why we like to space that out a little bit to where these children are in different grades as they get older. Now, the family can do a dual journey just with us, or they may want to work with another agency and us on that dual journey. But again, we want that same policy that we have, and we also want full communication with the other agency to make sure everything is transparent and we're doing things properly.
Just out of curiosity, why do you have that rule about the babies being in different grades? What is that there for?
Imagine this. So let's say they had 2 journeys concurrently going on, and the children were born about a month apart. Well, when these children get into first or second grade, they're not twins. And so, children are bullies nowadays, and you don't want your children to defend their surrogate, journey, based on that. And so that's why we really believe in that birth order, to make sure these children are in different ages.
Well, that's a really thoughtful and a considerate way of approaching that. I would have never thought of that, but that's wonderful. Does your agency do embryo donation?
Well, the American Surrogacy does not do the embryo donation piece of it, but we do work with intended parents that do embryo donation. I believe we've had a couple, one's I think successful with the baby, and the other one is officially into a new match. And so, we do take on families like that if they do adopt the embryos or do embryo donation.
What are the different types of egg donation?
There's known versus anonymous. I would say a known donor is when you know that donor in some capacity, versus anonymous, you will not. Back in our background in the adoption agency, we really encourage families to either do a semi-open adoption or an open adoption, because we truly believe in the best interest of the child, and that child knowing the authentic self as well as the genetic connection. Now, nowadays with egg donors, they get compensated. It takes a lot of screening, medications, egg retrieval process, and also too with today's day and age with 23andMe and Ancestry.com, it's just becoming more and more popular to have a known donor versus anonymous.
Yeah, that makes sense, because like you said, with those 23andMe and Ancestry, people are finding out anyway.
That's right. That's right.
How much will it change the cost of the surrogacy if you need the egg and the sperm donation?
So if an intended parent needs, let's just say, a sperm donor, Usually that range could be anywhere from about $700 up to a couple $1,000. And there's lots of sperm banks out there. But again, I want them to talk to their doctor first because they may have a relationship with a donor bank, or maybe they have their own donor list. So that's the sperm donor. The egg donor is quite costly. I would say on average between about $20,000 to $30,000 for an egg donor. And again, talk to the doctor about the pros and cons of fresh eggs versus frozen eggs. And again, do they have their own donor list, or do they have a good relationship with a donor bank?
So if you're needing both of those, the cost can significantly increase. Got it.
Yes.
How are surrogates matched when egg donation is involved?
Just same way as any other journey that we work. I would say, there's no difference from our end. Surrogates are going to get that embryo transfer one way or another. I don't know if it's different on the clinic side of it or not, but on our side, there is no difference.
What legal protections are in place for egg donation?
When you get to this point, you'll have an attorney represent you on a donor contract. And so, again, that's an attorney question. And usually these donor banks will have a list of attorneys that they can work with to secure that donor.
Do your state laws make a difference around embryos for surrogacy?
It's a good question. We typically will follow the laws of the surrogate state and not the intended parent state. So when we know what state your surrogate's going to reside in, we want you to have a Q&A with your attorney at that stage, because really only an attorney can tell you that legal advice on if those embryos, if there's specific laws about how those embryos are created out there. So I would table that until you get to the attorney stage, and they'll let you know. And really, in 47 states, they're very positive when it comes to surrogacy laws. There may be a couple extra steps an attorney may have to do in court based on your embryo connection and how that is formed. So again, I would pause that until you got to that stage.
Yeah, well, and I would really think that having an attorney and an agency you were working with would really make a difference around these very things, these little details, like what state the surrogate's in versus where the intended parents are, if they're different, because all of that can really factor into the surrogacy.
Absolutely. And we try to only work with a group of attorneys called the Assisted Reproductive Technology Attorneys, which means these attorneys specialize in surrogacy law. So that's our vast network of attorneys. So when you get to this point and you select an attorney from our network, you're going to be in good hands, and you'll be able to talk to them way before that surrogate becomes pregnant.
Yeah, I would think that would give you a lot of peace of mind from both the surrogate standpoint and the intended parents.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Wade, for joining us. Really appreciate all those insights.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lindsay. I had a great time, and invite me back anytime.
That wraps up this episode of Let's Talk Surrogacy. If you like our content, please like and subscribe for more surrogacy-related content.